Now, Du Bois's relationship with the NAACP reaches a crisis. I guess I shouldn't use that word since the magazine is a crisis. Reaches a crisis in 1934 when he publishes an editorial called Segregation. Has anyone in here read it far enough in the readings to know what was the cause of this break? Yes?
Walter White was like upset that he felt that he was using the crisis to criticize the NAACP, and so.
But what was the editorial about? So, do you remember? Well, it was called Segregation. So that kind of gives you a hint. What was the, yes?
Was it that the NAACP should be doing more radical things to end segregation in America?
Okay, but it was a little bit more combative than that. He was actually saying that segregation is not always a bad thing. That the black community has to get its act together, has to, this is something that's often said today, that black people have to form their own organizations, have to build their own institutions. Ultimately, the goal is integration, but along the way, segregation might not be such a bad idea. Well, Walter White didn't want to hear that, and this was precisely the thing that they had always been worried about with Du Bois. Here is this independent voice out there. Who does he speak for? Is it Du Bois or the NAACP? It's the NAACP's journal. We didn't approve this editorial. And so Du Bois is forced to leave. He resigns. He says, "If I criticize within, my words fall on deaf ears. If I criticize openly, I seem to be washing dirty linen in public." So now he's 66 years old. Why doesn't he just retire? One of the amazing things about Du Bois is here's this guy, he's 66, he's been through all of this, he's the preeminent intellectual still. He has published the most influential book of the century in terms of African American life. He's a founder of the NAACP. The NAACP kicks him out. Why doesn't he just quit? Well, he's still got 30 years of very full life to live. And he goes to Atlanta University, gets back into his scholarly studies, founds a journal, Phylon, publishes Black Reconstruction, the most important book probably of that era in terms of the study of Reconstruction. Relaunches the Atlanta University Studies of African American life, publishes another autobiography. He'll publish still another one later in his life, and gets right in the middle of all the controversies about World War II and the Cold War. But in the 1930s, other people are beginning to add their voices to the mix. For example, black nationalists. Black nationalism had fallen into decline after the imprisonment of Marcus Garvey in the 1920s, but by the 1930s, that was one of the responses to the Depression. In Detroit, for example, former Garveyite Elijah Poole joins the small group called the Nation of Islam. And he eventually changes his name to Elijah Muhammad and becomes the new group's leader. By the way, what happened to the old leader is that he mysteriously disappears, and no one has ever found out whatever happened to him. But Elijah Muhammad becomes the leader during the 1930s. It remains a relatively small group until the 1950s, of course, when Malcolm X joins and becomes the best organizer Elijah Muhammad ever had. Carter G. Woodson would be another voice, also a Harvard graduate. So that's no longer a distinction only for Du Bois. Carter G. Woodson's most famous book, anyone? Anyone read it? The Miseducation of the Negro. It's a good title, really great. You should read it. It's, he denounced educational institutions that estrange black students from the black masses, while failing to provide the practical knowledge they need to uplift the race. Higher education, he believes, should be a preparation to think and work out a program to serve the lowly rather than to live as an aristocrat.